Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Yuri Castro, and I'm very happy to be here with you today and welcome my co host for the Seeds of Knowledge series, Marcia Trajano. Marcia, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much. So, the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living releases one of these talks every first and third Sunday of every month. And today, Marcia is going to be talking about a very interesting topic. She's going to be talking about the apocalypse within. So, Jung, archetypes, and the psychology of renewal. So, just some thoughts that I have here, Marcia, I wanted to
Yeah,
share with you as I
yeah,
read this, the title and the subtitle. I start to think, we're talking Carl Jung, we're talking, psychology, we're talking all, archetypes, the word that's very much associated with him. We're talking about perhaps what's in the collective mind, what's going on, and also the bridge between psychology and spirituality, psychology,
absolutely.
and
Right,
spiritism, and the
right.
apocalypse. So I'm assuming there's gonna be some some difficult conversations because it's the apocalypse and what's the archetype around that. So that's some
Right.
of my thoughts.
All right.
But I want to give you the floor, Marcia, so you can give us and bless us with the presentation. And I'll see you in a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you. Talk to you
Thank you.
soon. So, hi, hi, everyone. It is indeed very good to be here, to be able to talk about this rather interesting or intriguing, right, concept. And it's interesting because just the word apocalypse plays deep into our cultural, religious, and actually symbolic imagination. We'll be talking about the archetype and, as I said, the bifurcations of what does it mean to us spiritually, psychologically, and from a Jungian perspective. So let's go ahead and get started. And yes, I'm just putting this big image that is scary to me, and I try to be very scary. And before we tackle, right, the maybe the definition of the archetype of the apocalypse, I wanted to understand the word, the meaning apocalypse. And it's very interesting because apocalypse comes from the Greek, the two words, apo and calypto, which means take away and to cover, hide, right? So when you take away what's covering you, hiding you, apocalypse means literally to take away something that has been hidden. Ah, what what has been hidden? And the truth, or maybe more specifically, the truth about the future, what's about to come. I have to say, I'm a project manager, right? And project managers, day to day, there's one big issue, an area, which is risk management, issue management, and that's all about this something that we don't know and we are afraid there's a risk and we deal with that. Well, this is not project management. This is our life, and we hear just by the words, and you already mentioned something already, but if you start to think, where did I hear, what is it, what are the emotions that this emote or evoke? And in the New Testament, right, the final book of the Christian Bible, it is often referred to the apocalypse or revelation. And revelation is the key word here, given to Saint John. John, his visions, we could say, took away the cover of what was previously hidden, and he revealed what? The future, or the future end of times. So that's start to get kind of scary because through the centuries, us Christians in general, we start to refer to John and his vision the apocalyptic visions, and they've been somehow just linked, associated with that huge, great, final, catastrophic end to Earth. Yes, this is what is in popular culture and the majority of people. And I really wanted to spend a few more minutes here because I find this quite interesting. If we were right now to stop and say, please, anyone here, tell me what is the first thing that come to mind when you think of it. And right, there's so many mental associations and some deeply cultural and symbolic, some of them are personal, maybe psychological. We can just start to look at what else besides the biblical reference that I already gave. And I wanted to say, yes, it's found in religion, but it's also found in literature, in art, in film, and it's all about somehow our fears. And I'm here to dismantle that. Yes, that's the goal of today's talk. When we start to think about um, that religious association, just for us to start sinking in into our collective awareness of this word apocalypse, we tie with that end of times or the divine punishment. There's some places that you find associated to the cleansing, right? Some people talk about the necessary um, just destruction, burning of the field before a new field can be planted. From a prophetic or revelatory perspective, right? It is that it's unveiling, right? It's unveiling, it's the new, it's the revelation, but we somehow look at it only on the destruction aspect to the word. Some people from also this literal or religious association think of apocalypse as this cosmic battle of good and evil, right? So the images that come to my mind are war, angels, demons. Yes, there's a book about it, final confrontation. And that started with that biblical reference for St. John's revelations. We can go to something else, right? And that's what most people think about it, which is this modern media, pop cultural reference to zombies, dystopian imagery, right? Or technological apocalypse. We can even think about the apocalypse that came with the idea, I don't know if you were born, but the Y2K, and I say you were not born because I actually know somebody that had no idea, but I lived through that. At the last day of 1999, we had this crisis, a global crisis, that the world would disappear because of we would hit the year 2000 at the end of December 31st at midnight, right? But there's others much closer to us. Maybe the idea, and the Terminator as the movie comes to my mind, but artificial intelligence take over, or even closer to us, the cyber warfare, in any type of technological uncontrolled dominance. But beyond that, there's some things that also we are living through as we speak, right? There are the environmental catastrophes, and we see this on a daily basis based on climate crisis and some events that may be pointed to what happened so many years ago with the dinosaurs, right? With the extinction events and the the fear that those things trigger to us. And finally, and I'm sure you can think about the several movies when I talk about what about the alien or cosmic threats, right? The not only from asteroids but also invasions or cosmic disasters. Those are all I could say used, leveraged, or exploited today in our modern culture. Um, but we're not here to talk about movies, fun as they may be. We're here to talk about what is this bringing to us, this idea of the apocalypse within. So when we go there, we now start to look into the term from a cultural but psychological association. So, for example, we could reference existential anxiety, which comes from our, let's say, fear of loss of meaning, or even the existential anxiety that comes with our set of security framework, our systems that we are embedded, that are start to collapse, and we could say the world is coming to an end. Maybe the world as we know could be coming to an end. We could all say, I'm not going to deny that, but it's the fear that the as we see a new world order perhaps coming to being, how it triggers our own fears. Beyond that, we've been through a collective trauma not so long ago with COVID-19, right? So similar to the widespread, very real fear of that unknown virus that, yes, impacted so many families, right? We also have other types of collective traumas. I can remember the Ebola a virus in Africa not so long ago, or anthrax. But even we can think about images of war, the plague, not not so close to us today, but perhaps the nuclear disasters of the past, right? The also perhaps on those systems breakdowns, right? The collapse of our society when economy, technology, and even long institution that hundreds of years of solid institutions are being broken down. And with that, there's also this whole new idea of survivalism, which is the groups of people that feel that they need to survive outside of the current constructs because of the long and impactful mental image of scarcity, very real during World War II, for example, but the survivalist movement, where that scarcity becomes so real that I'm going to now create something to deal with a post apocalyptic moment in our society. That's not what we're going to be talking about either. But you start to see those fears very real based on what we are all as a larger society are going through. And then we start to go into a more personal, which is really the archetypal associations or the symbolic associations. And to me, this is what's most important for us to talk about, which is the idea of death and rebirth, right? Yes, symbolic. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the moment that this archetype of apocalypse brings to us as a moment where we're finding or facing a collapse of the old order, whatever that may mean to you, so that a new form, a new order can emerge. So Jung talks a lot about it, in fact, and he sees this, for example, when he talks about dreams as the transformation of the psyche. And when we transform your psyche, you have to have this death and rebirth going on, right? It's a cyclical nature of what we are. But another aspect that we can start to think about it from the term apocalypse is the shadow. And I'm going to speak a little bit more later on, but the shadow confrontation, meaning simply that we're facing our suppressed fears or the end, right, of the ego's illusions. So it's really the no longer the fear that everything's going to fall apart, but the fear that my egoic constructs are falling apart. Therefore, the illusions that I hold dear are also falling apart, and I feel very vulnerable, and I no longer have that structure, the egoic structure that held me. And from that, there is this idea that I love, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, or the purification through chaos. Yes. So, with that, is simply put, the idea that destruction is the path to clear way for the real truth or a higher order in our lives. So, all of those symbolic associations are quite important for us to think about it. And finally, one that I love from Joseph Campbell's perspective, right, which is the idea of the hero's journey, the hero's threshold. So, in myths, the apocalyptic association really references those events that precede the hero's transformation. So it's really about the what we call the old man dying and the new man being born. The old Marcia that is no longer does not work for me anymore. It's obsolete, so that that has to quote unquote die, so that a new order, a new person, authentically so, Marcia can be created. So, in so many words, psychologically speaking, apocalypse often works as a projection screen for our deep, deep fears, right? Those I could say fear of death, fear of loss, or even the fear of a meaningless journey, right? But apocalypse also, as just as a wrapping up here, opens the door for hope, or renewal, the chance of, best way to say, wipe the slate clean so we have something else. But let's talk a little bit. We're talking about apocalypse, but it really about archetypes as well. So let's spend a few minutes talking about archetype. So I'm going to go back so we can move forward, right? What is an archetype, right? The meaning of archetype is, can be found in, and I have it in the screen, so I'm going to read for you, but it's found in a paper that Jung presented in a symposium in London. I believe was 1919, and he used the term archetype for the first time, and he says the following: a priori, inborn forms of intuition, he quote unquote intuition, which are the necessary determinants of all psychic processes. This is an archetype. So he continues, just as his instincts compel man to a specifically human mode of existence, so the archetypes force his way of perception and apprehension into specifically human patterns. The instincts and the archetypes together form the collective unconscious. Whoa, I love it. I love it. Jung is amazing. So, what are the archetypes? What are archetypes then, right? In Jungian psychology, archetypes, important for us to remember. This is, classic textbook definitions. They are universal patterns, images, potentials of behavior, all of those that exist in the collective unconscious. So, in so many words, they are inherited structure of the psyche shared by all human beings, no matter who you are, where you are born, from what family type, right? So they're like these psychic blueprints or a form, right, that shapes. If you were thinking about a cake form, that is a form, so it shapes how humans experience life events, and those are the archetypes. So what are those big life events? Well, to me, I usually can say birth, right? Death, love, transformations. But beyond that, those acts of heroism are also somehow those life events that mark one's life. One of the most interesting um, explanation of the this concept is find in the if there's a book, Anthony Stevens, Archetype Revisited. So it's very interesting if you read that, because he's very approachable and consumable in his work about archetypes, right? And I just wanted to say uh, that all archetypes, and we're now diving into psychology, right? All archetypes are innate, as I mentioned, which just simply means they are part of our psychic makeup, just like our instincts are, right? You don't need to tell Marcia, breathe. I instinctively breathe. It's part of my who I am, my makeup. So we don't have to learn them or do any sort of conscious work like breathing to make them part of who you are as a human being. They are already within us. It's that form of self-organization, naturally speaking. So interesting enough is to think that there are neuropsychic centers, right? And those are part of our psyche and our nervous system. So we start to talk about our psychic makeup, we're talking about our psyche, our nervous system, very much like instincts. And they really, the best way to explain is they hold our potential, right? They spark or they give rise for our patterns of behavior. Yes. So very important, because we need to put it all together, and it's really important for us to understand. Otherwise, it's all for nothing. So archetypes are there to help us respond. There was this active response to a moment uh, that we experience in life, and that's when the behavior comes based on that. So I'm talking too much. Let me see if I can give you an example. An example of an archetype is, let's pretend you're walking along, let's say close to home, the street that takes you home, right? I'm walking along in the sidewalk, and out of the blue, and I'm rushed, I have some place to be, but out of the blue I see a tiny little infant all alone, and this baby is crying. What would you do? Well, there are several articles about this, but they just say to us that virtually every single one of us, in a situation that we're walking by, even when you're rushed to do something and you see that baby, our innate, therefore, you don't have to work on it. It's innately there is a this burst of stop, right? Just make you stop, look around. Where are the parents for this baby? Is there nanny? Is there babysitter? Is there caregiver? Where are they? And you see, and they're not present. And you're like, what should I do? This behavior shows exact the moment of activation of the mother archetype, right? The mother archetype predisposes all of us to give nurture, protection, comfort for that, in this case, this baby in distress. And our impulse is to go ahead and listen, or follow through with that mother archetype and go take care. The other aspect of the archetype is that this is universal, right? And Jung calls it the part of the um, collective unconscious because, as I mentioned previously, they are common to all persons. It doesn't matter your race, your culture, your religious belief system, nothing. Every human collectively, right, has a mother, father, birth, death, apocalypse archetype in their culture. So this is quite so interesting for me to talk about it. So I spoke about the archetype being activated when there is a life circumstance, and we're not talking about the mud, no longer the me walking in the sidewalk and triggers my mother archetype, but we're talking about life in general, very, very generically speaking. When I go through different life events or circumstances, or even some inner conditions, they may trigger the emergence of the symbolic patterns into our consciousness. So it's important for us, just as we wrap it up this discussion, to understand the mechanism for that archetype to be triggered. They operate below our awareness. It's always there, just like breathing, right? It's there. But when they are activated, and again, could be a crisis or some trauma or even a spiritual awakening, now they manifest themselves, and can manifest in dreams. Yeah, or fantasies, or emotions, or a compulsion, or a vision, or a myth, or a behavior, like you taking care of that baby, right? It's interesting because I've been reading just the past couple of weeks a lot about the mandalas, which was important for Jung, right? So when we talk about midlife crisis, it may activate the self archetype, and it is manifested through visions or dreams of mandala, which is something that happened to Jung, but also other types of dreams, right? So it's all about I'm dying, my midlife, I'm dying, and I need to be born again. But there is another example, falling in love, right? Which may activate the anima and animus archetype, and you go like, what? Yeah, when we start to think about the idealizations or projections, or even the deep emotional pull for the other, when we're all of us are going through this somehow, it feels like that, but facing some personal failure, and that may activate our shadow archetype, right? So you are then triggered to look into the aspects of who you are that make you really uncomfortable. And all of this, psychologically speaking, just means that the activation, I think of it as a flicker of a finger, right? It's just a brings to you that awareness to both opportunity, right? I have an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to transform, or the risk, and it's important. To think that something's going on, and I'm triggered to look at those the what's bringing with that activation, um, maybe emotional overwhelming, or even projections of who I am, etc. And so from that perspective, and I'm talking about Jungian psychology, now we're talking about the integration work, that conscious work that comes when we recognize the symbolic content, we understand our emotions, and we move on to go through that activated archetype. But I'm here to talk a little bit about Joanna DeAngelis, and in Joanna DeAngelis language, it's so interesting because she speaks of divine self. She speaks of the masks of the ego. She talks about the shadow rebirth. So when we read her books, right, in the psychology series, we start to see that Joanna is completely aligned symbolically with what we just talked today, which is the Jungian archetypes. And especially when we talk about the plenitude, moments of health and consciousness, the conscious being, those are all great books. We start to identify that those archetypes in the spiritual psychology work of Joanna de Angelis are identified as a psychological spiritual crisis, as archetypes, right? And in Joanna's terms, they are activated, and as such, they signal those moments in our lives that brings us, spark us to start to work on our inner transformation, our spiritual work. And Joanna frames those moments of activations as opportunities for self-illumination, right? The shadow, and we see a lot of the work that she brings about the shadow in several of her books, but she sees that as our imperfections, not to be squashed and repressed, which is what we do with the shadow, but as an opportunity to heal them, right? And she also references the self with the capital S as the divine essence that is all within us emerging, right? The again, the idea of the hero with the moral courage to go against those imperfections, but then we emerge the old person, right? Out of that, you get that you receive the spiritual guidance to emerge healed. So there are many, many archetypes, and I'm not going to go over them because I don't know that we have time, but it's super, super interesting when, at least to me, when we talk about it. We're gonna now put it all together. We talked about apocalypse, we talked about archetype. Let's talk about the archetype of apocalypse, right? And as I mentioned, concept is found at the very core of Carl Gustav Jung, and it's really interesting because it really brings us to today's world, right? This apocalypse archetype, and his work in those archetype, they um, as a reminder, they all point to this notion that Jung brings quite specifically to those patterns, right? But he brings to the idea of fields of potential which have an intentionality but are completely independent. What do we mean by that? Well, there is the central archetype, which is the self, and it is this self archetype is the transpersonal center of the psyche, right? Our soul. And it acts as an instrument and agent of transcendence. So, this self, the archetype, it is indistinguishable from the image of God. So, when we go back to Apocalypse, just to make things interesting, this back and forth, when we go back to Apocalypse, right, the revelation and uncovering what has been hidden, we could say now that the revelation that apocalypse means is the revealing of a new truth. So the process is as follows. There are four steps. Number one, you get to the revelation. Number two, judgment, yes. Number three, destruction. And number four, new birth. So let's go back to just start to imagine where we are today. An example could be that, right? Let's just what we've seen in our own civilization in the past 200 years, right? What have we seen in this, since the 1800s to now, the 2000s? Revelation. There is bursts of new knowledge, scientific, psychological, sociological, so on and so forth, right? There's so much that just burst out in this past 200 years. But when we number two, when we talk about judgment, we start to say that there has been judgment or reassessment made on the basis of the new truth. What am I talking about? I am talking about this new source of knowledge that is being revealed to us. So think 200 years, that's all I'm packing here. But before 1800s, what was there? And if you can even go lower, right, in medieval and beyond, or before that, we start to see a very different truth in society. But this is number two, this reassessment, this new idea of confronting new source of knowledge. And then we go to the third one, that's the scary one, which is destruction. Oh, yes, destruction. That's the, apocalypse, the collapse. Yes. Of what? The collapse of beliefs and institutions based on what was once believed to be my truth, right? And what we mean by that, everything that was once my truth are now inadequate, inappropriate, even dysfunction with the new truth. And the fourth process is a new birth, a new worldview. So when we go back and forth with archetype, right, we have to say that just because the archetype exists in you and me, all of us humans, it doesn't mean that it's going to be activated, right? And I love it because every time I'm thinking in those terms, I go back in my mind's eye to the talent, the parable of the talents, right? We may have a talent, we just bury it, and it's never activated, it never grows. But anyways, the those archetypes could lie buried, dormant in all of our entire lives, or or even for the life of an entire age. So when Jung sees what's happening in our era today, this past 200 years, of course, he's no longer with us. what he sees is that the central archetype of order and meaning, okay, has been activated in the collective unconscious. And when the self becomes activated, it means a change in the collective cultural worldview. So, what I'm bringing to us here is that a new process of spiritual redefinition and psychological maturation. It's always something that Joanna brings over and over again, right? Spiritual and psychological maturity. So, this new process for spiritual and psychological redefinition and maturity that has been unfolding for, say, in the past 200 years, it's happening. And if one is going to believe in the public opinion and all the polls, yes, God is alive and well. So just to summarize, the archetype of apocalypse, it can be understood as the activation of the archetype of the self, which is the central archetype of meaning, which is bringing with it some new worldview, a new God image, a new relationship to the divine, and this new stage of psychological maturation of humanity. And with that, I would like to talk a little bit with our last few minutes together as the idea of apocalypse as an inner transformation. Yes, you heard me right, right? And that's hard for us to put those two concepts together. That's why I spent a lot of time massaging those concepts because the right, we if we think in terms of how in psychology, I'm talking about Jungian psychology, that apocalypse archetype is referencing or referring to unconscious patterns of images and ideas. I already gave you this definition, right? And those patterns of images and ideas are related to the themes of destruction, transformation, and renewal. So to me, this is quite powerful, and it signifies the potential for profound changes in our individual psyche and the collective consciousness. So there are 4 points that we could just briefly bring them up when we talk about this this theme of apocalypse as inner transformation. Point one is the idea of apocalypse as inner crisis, right? Which we, it can be understood as the ego confronting its own limits. Symbolically speaking, the end of the world is not the literal destruction of the planet, but it symbolizes the collapse of the ego's old world, right? And how does it do that? The end of my ego's world is the end of also of my ego's stability, that egoic construct. And it is often experienced by all of us as the loss of something, and also experience in the this existential emptiness, or even, and this is classic midlife crisis, right? The collapse of my life structures. Yes, I'm hitting the end, or a crossroads of my career, or my relationship, or even my belief systems. So when Jung talks about it, he really calls it the symbolic death, right? This collapse, which is, he says, yes, you may be afraid of the word death, even if it's symbolic, but it's really the beginning of what is really important in this inner transformation, which is the beginning, the initiation into a deeper self awareness, right? So from that perspective, I just want to say that Joanna de Angelis brings back the spiritist perspective of the invitation. There's lots and lots of beautiful invitations in the works of Joanna de Angelis, but she calls it the divine invitation to growth, right? So when we read Joanna, we start to see that when those things that are so difficult for us to go through. Remember, we talked about my career. I spent 35 years being A, and now that A career is no longer, and I go through some very difficult moments of loss. Well, this is the moment, according to Joanna, according to Jung, according to many other sources of truth around this subject. It is this invitation for us to grow, to expand our consciousness and our spirituality. So, in Plenitude, the book that she wrote, Joanna, often refers to and I love this, so I have to share with all of you the necessary disorganization of the old self. Yeah, it's chaos, right? So that the higher self can emerge. How about that? But this is point one. Let's go to point two. And the point two is the idea of, right, who talked about it, the dissolution of the ego or the death before renewal. And it's important because symbolically speaking, that apocalypse is that moment where we are facing a moment of being stripped away of our own illusions. And yeah, we're talking about our personas, right? Our false, and I put my hand in front of me because I always think persona is a mask, right? The mask and or our outdated beliefs. But um, we we can think about it. Oh, piece of cake, I'm stronger than that. I can go through my midlife crisis de jour. And I said, no, this is not easy. It's quite frightening. It really feels like you're being annihilated, right? Because when we are face to face with this invitation, yes, invitation, this cosmic, this divine invitation to transcend my ego's rigid defense mechanism, i I no longer have anything to hold on to, right? It is an upheaval of my own identity. So for Jung, again, the apocalypse, he calls the death, the symbolic death, is the initiation into individuation, a key concept in Jungian's psychology, but it's really this passage, right? Your psychic or your soul's death into the individuation. And we can talk about a little bit of mythological or archetypal descent into the underworld from a death imagery, then to be reborn. But let's not talk about death because most of us are afraid of that. So I'm going to talk about Joanna because Joanna brings this different emphasis, which is emphasis on self knowledge, renewal, which mirrors this process of my old self, right, being dismantled. So my truer identity, my more authentic identity can emerge. And this stage is the disorganization of the false self, right? She talked previously about the old self. I'm now bringing the false self. And this is when we, our spirit, our our soul that is immortal start to shed our illusions, right? We start to shed even our um, automatic defenses, our pride or vanity. And for some, this is known as the dark night of the soul, which is when we are often guided to this profound silence and all of our old voices vanish so that we are ready to listen to the guidance to begin for our new self. I'm going to go real fast the next because we're getting to the end of our time together. But there's like two more points, three more points. But point three is the this apocalypse as inner transformation. It's all about shadow integration, or what I would call having the courage to confront what I so expertly hid before. So, with apocalypse and chaos and destruction and darkness, right? We start to see breaking down, and guess what? Everything that was hiding under the rug is start to come back up and resurface, right? So, psychologically speaking, we're talking about meeting the shadow. And what am I meeting? Usually we're talking about those primal um, emotions, fear, guilt, all of our desires that we don't feel that we own, or even projections, right? And when we do this, we're getting ready for our process of individuation. And as we know, the shadow carries all that we repress, including uh, all the guilt that we carry, the impulses, the wounds. So, from the apocalyptical imagery, this is exactly what the chaos, but also the darkness represents, when you have to face, to confront all that you expertly don't want to, and you bury, you hide away. So let's think about it. There's a reminder that I wanted to bring to all of you, is that this comes from Jung, of course, is that please, please, please note that when we talk about the meeting the shadow, confronting the shadow, we're not saying that integration is not about eliminating, killing the shadow, but making it conscious to you. And he also reminds this. The battle of good and evil that is really part of the apocalyptic imagery mirrors exactly the inner struggle of you integrating your shadow aspects, right? And you do this, and you have to understand that we are should not be destroyed by our shadow aspects. We should integrate them. With Joanna, we are consistently guided toward the acceptance of our imperfections, right? And so she does this rather than tell us to deny or suppress. And she explains that this denial of our imperfection simply leads to sustaining suffering, right? Whereas awareness liberates all of us. So I love this idea because it's such um, an invitation to living authentically and beautifully toward our inner transformation. Two more points. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm taking too long. Yuri, don't disinvite me in the future. But the point four is the idea of revelation of the self. We did start by talking about the original Greek word revelation, unveiling, and that point is really important, right? It is about knowing your true meaning of who you are. Well, so think about it. After the destruction or the ego's collapse, that's when the self, right, that divine spark or the imago Dei, the God within, is revealed. And I love it because it really gives me joy to see that this idea of apocalypse is not dark, but it's actually quite beautiful, right? The self becomes at that point our guiding principle, replacing that collapsed ego that we killed, right? And they're no longer the center of our psyche, but our self, the divine within is. And Joanna the Angels reinforces this when she describes that process of the divine essence within emerging as again the illusions of the old self dissolve, and our souls, our spirit, our immortal spirit perceives its true identity beyond any ephemeral, transitory roles that we take on this life. And she also says at that point, intuition grows and peace actually starts to take root within. I love it. And my final point is again, it's all about renewal, individuation. And so, again, the image, the symbolic image of apocalyptic visions of destruction is really the resulting idea, the resulting transfer reality that is transformed that will come afterwards, right? Is renewal. Psychologically, when we reach the Jungian term, right, individuation, our conscious integration of the unconscious, yes, a lot of words, the conscious integration of the unconscious will create a more integrated personality. And the psyche reorganizes around the self, and we start to live a life that is full now of peace, inner peace, of harmony and creativity. This is described by Jung as the new heaven and new earth, symbolizing this reorganized psyche under the guidance of the self. So, the moral and spiritual renewal we reach after our moments of inner crisis correspond to this stage of spiritual maturity. How about that? This is why I think the apocalypse is such a powerful metaphor in spiritual psychological work because it kind of brings drama to something that is quite painful to all of us, but necessary, right? Which is the destruction of outdated structures, belief systems, so that there is room to something else much better to emerge, which is our spiritually aligned self. Yes, we are concluding with just a few takeaways, right? Which is we started with the term very scary apocalypse, which implies usually total destruction, but it's really the archetype to point us to the potential for rebirth, new beginning after a period of chaos, destruction, upheaval. And it's also an image, as I mentioned before, deeply understood or rooted in our collective unconscious. It is shared by our human experience, not just by personal experience. And archetypes, remember, can be activated by various factors, including our personal crisis, our societal disruption, or even when we're exposed to those apocalyptic imagery in movies and the various media channels, right? So we need to be aware of it because it can manifest in dreams, but also in deep rooted fears and anxieties, and even in social unrest and political fanaticism. So we need to be aware what is causing that, and let's open our eyes to embrace it in a healthy way. For those who are Jungian analysts, this archetype, when it's well understood and integrated, can be a beautiful and powerful catalyst for our own psychological growth and to move us, to take us to a more complete understanding of ourselves and the world and our place in this world. So think about it. The activation of this apocalypse archetype is just also a link to the activation of the self, which is our central archetype and meaning, right? So I know it is frightening, but it's really not necessarily a prediction of inevitable destruction. It can signify a necessary period that we need to go through to dismantle old structures, old beliefs, to make way for something new, right? So, in essence, let us all welcome this apocalypse archetype because it will force us, like the parable of the talents, to multiply our talents, to really look at not just us, but the entire humanity's potential for renewal. And it starts by confronting our fears and embracing our transformation. And with that, I want to say thank you. Hey, Yuri, I hope I did not go too crazy in this discussion.
Hi, Marcia. Thank you so much. No, I think it was great. I felt like it was a lesson on psychology as well. And I
Yeah.
love one. I love your pictures. I just think that they're very, expressive.
Uh,
And I also like the idea, in the end, as you're saying as well, how I think you managed to turn the apocalypse, like something catastrophic and tragic, into something that's actually hopeful, something that's
yeah.
necessary, and something that's good, which is very much the message of spiritism. And
Yes.
I really appreciate how you kind of like brought that all back. So that's nice. And do you have any final message for everybody who's watching us? And then if you can lead that with a prayer.
I just wanted to leave with an invitation, right? And this is Joanna D'Angelo's invitation to embrace all that we are. And I would say, in my words, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of our imperfections, because the invitations is for us to awaken the God within, right? Our sacred within. But with that, I would just invite all of us to also, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes and in gratitude, perceive all the blessings that we are continuously receiving and be courageous to seek, to see, to identify, and to move on toward our own path, all of us separately, but in unison perhaps, toward our individuation. So be it.
So it is. Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you, everybody that was here. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.